Marcus Reed pressed his palm against the cracked viewport of his transport vessel, watching the alien world of Thessera Prime grow larger through the spider web of fracture spreading across the reinforced glass. The supply run to the remote research outpost should have been routine: drop off equipment, pick up samples, return to the orbital station. Instead, his ship's navigation system had chosen the worst possible moment to malfunction, sending him careening toward the planet's surface in a barely controlled descent. The impact threw him forward against his restraints with enough force to knock the breath from his lungs. Emergency lights bathed the cockpit in angry red as alarms shrieked their electronic warnings. Marcus fumbled with the safety harness, his fingers trembling as adrenaline coursed through his system. When he finally freed himself and stumbled toward the rear of the small vessel, he could see daylight streaming through a jagged tear in the hull. He was alive, which was more than he'd expected 30 seconds ago. The air outside was breathable according to his suit's scanners, though it carried an odd sweetness that reminded him of jasmine mixed with ozone. Marcus climbed through the breach, his boots crunching on crystalline sand that sparkled like crushed diamonds under Thessara's binary suns. The landscape stretched before him in rolling dunes of that same glittering sand, interrupted by towering spires of what looked like coral that had been carved by wind into impossible spirals. His left shoulder throbbed where it had struck the control panel during the crash. When Marcus reached up to probe the injury, his fingers came away sticky with blood. The cut wasn't deep, but it was long, running from his collarbone nearly to his shoulder blade where a piece of torn metal had caught him. "Perfect," he muttered, pressing his palm against the wound to slow the bleeding. The research outpost was supposed to be somewhere in this region, but his communication equipment had been fried in the crash. He'd have to find help on foot, assuming there was any help to be found on this crystalline desert world. Marcus had taken perhaps 20 steps from his wrecked ship when he heard it, a sound like wind chimes mixed with birdsong, melodic and utterly alien. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon for the source, and found himself looking at the most extraordinary being he'd ever encountered. She stood perhaps 30 meters away, having apparently approached while he was distracted by his injury. Her skin was pale blue-white, like moonlight on snow, and seemed to shimmer with its own internal luminescence. Hair the color of deep ocean waves fell to her waist in loose spirals that moved with a life of their own, as if stirred by underwater currents. But it was her eyes that made Marcus forget to breathe, large and luminous, they shifted color like the surface of a soap bubble, cycling through shades of green and gold and silver. She wore what appeared to be a form-fitting bodysuit in deep purple, with intricate patterns that seemed to flow and change as she moved. Various pouches and instruments hung from a belt around her slender waist, marking her as some kind of professional, though Marcus couldn't guess what profession. "You're injured," she said, her voice carrying that same melodic quality he'd heard before. The words were clearly accented, but her standard was excellent. Marcus found his voice. "Just a scratch. My ship crashed, and I was looking for the research station." "Yes, I know." She stepped closer, and Marcus caught her scent, something like rain on summer grass mixed with an underlying sweetness he couldn't identify. "I'm Zara Velthus, field medic for the Thessaran Ecological Survey. We detected your ship's descent pattern and emergency beacon." Relief flooded through him. "Marcus Reed, supply runner for Kepler Station. I thought my comm equipment was dead." "It is," Zara replied with what might have been a smile. Her features were delicately angular, ethereally beautiful in a way that made Marcus acutely aware of his own dust-covered, blood-stained appearance. "We detected the beacon's final transmission before your crash. I was dispatched to provide assistance." She gestured toward his injured shoulder. "May I examine your wound? I have medical training." Marcus nodded, oddly nervous as Zara approached. She was smaller than him by nearly a foot, but there was something about her presence that made the air itself seem to thrum with energy. When she reached up to examine his shoulder, her fingers were cool against his skin, and Marcus felt an odd tingling sensation wherever she touched. "This will need proper cleaning and treatment," she murmured, her luminous eyes focused on the cut. "There's a field shelter not far from here where I have supplies." As she spoke, Marcus found his mind wandering despite the situation. There was something hypnotic about the way she moved, the way her hair seemed to float around her shoulders. He caught himself wondering what it would feel like to touch those shimmering strands, what her skin would feel like without the barrier of medical examination between them. The thoughts embarrassed him. Here was an alien woman trying to help him, and he was having distinctly unprofessional reactions. Zara's hand stilled on his shoulder, and when Marcus looked down at her, those color-shifting eyes had gone wide with what looked like surprise. A flush of deeper blue spread across her cheeks, and she stepped back as if she'd been stung. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice slightly breathless. "I didn't mean to, that is, I should have warned you." "Warn me about what?" Marcus asked, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. Zara's flush deepened, and she looked away, suddenly finding the crystalline sand very interesting. "My species, we're naturally telepathic. Physical contact can sometimes amplify the connection. I may have inadvertently." She trailed off, wrapping her arms around herself. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. She'd read his thoughts. Those embarrassing, inappropriate thoughts about touching her hair, about the warmth of her skin, about how beautiful she was. Heat flooded his face as mortification set in. "Oh God," he said, running his uninjured hand through his hair. "I'm sorry, I didn't know, I wasn't trying to." "You don't need to apologize," Zara interrupted, though she still wouldn't meet his eyes. The thoughts weren't intentional. And they weren't unpleasant. The last part was said so quietly that Marcus almost missed it. When he did process her words, he felt his embarrassment shift into something else entirely, a warm flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with his injury. "They weren't?" he asked carefully. Zara finally looked up at him, and there was something almost shy in her expression. "Terrans, we value honesty above almost everything else. Your thoughts were honest. Uncomplicated. It's refreshing." "Refreshing?" Marcus couldn't help but smile at that. "I crash land on your planet, get myself injured, and have inappropriate thoughts about the person trying to help me, and you find it refreshing?" "Perhaps refreshing isn't the right word," Zara said, and there was definitely a smile playing at the corners of her mouth now. "But interesting, certainly." They stood there for a moment, the awkwardness of the situation balanced against something new and electric building between them. Marcus found himself studying her face, noting the way her luminous skin seemed to pulse gently with her heartbeat, the way her hair moved in patterns that defied the light breeze. "We should get you to the shelter," Zara said finally, though she made no immediate move to leave. "That wound needs attention, and the afternoon heat can be dangerous for humans." "Right," Marcus agreed, though he found himself reluctant to break whatever spell had fallen over them. "Lead the way." As they walked across the crystalline desert, Zara keeping a careful distance between them, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his simple supply run had just become considerably more complicated. The crash had been an accident, but meeting Zara, and the strange connection that had sparked between them, felt like something else entirely. Something that might change everything. 3 months after Marcus Reed's fateful crash on Thessera Prime, archaeologist Jenna Cross knelt in the red dust of Valethra, carefully brushing sediment away from what appeared to be carved stone. The ancient ruins stretched before her in the fading light of the planet's amber sun, their purpose and origin still mysteries after 2 weeks of excavation. Her team had returned to base camp hours ago, but Jenna couldn't bring herself to leave, not when she was so close to uncovering what might be the most significant archaeological find of her career. The symbol emerging under her brush was unlike anything in the xenoarchaeological databases. Intricate spirals interwove with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow even though they were carved in solid stone. She'd seen similar motifs throughout the ruins, but this one was different, more complex, more purposeful, as if it were trying to communicate something specific. "You work very late, human." Jenna's heart nearly stopped at the unexpected voice. She spun around, archaeological tools scattering in the dust, to find herself facing a figure that seemed to have materialized from the shadows between the ancient pillars. Her first instinct was to reach for the emergency beacon on her belt, but something in the stranger's posture, curious rather than threatening, made her pause. He was tall, perhaps 7 feet, with skin that looked like polished obsidian shot through with veins of silver that pulsed gently with his heartbeat. His hair was white as starlight, hanging in loose waves to his shoulders, and his eyes were the deep purple of amethyst. He wore robes of midnight blue that seemed to absorb the fading sunlight, and strange symbols glowed softly along the edges of the fabric. "I'm sorry," Jenna said, finding her voice and pushing herself to her feet. "I didn't realize anyone else was here. I'm Jenna Cross, xenoarchaeologist with the Terrans Survey Corps." "I know who you are," the figure replied, his voice carrying an odd harmonic quality that seemed to resonate in her chest. "I am Keth Morvain, keeper of the old knowledge. I have been watching your work here." "Watching my work?" Jenna felt a flicker of unease. "For how long?" "Since you arrived," Keth admitted, stepping closer. In the better light, she could see that his features were sharp and aristocratic, beautiful in an otherworldly way. "Forgive me if that troubles you. It has been centuries since anyone showed such reverence for the ancient places." "Your Veil Fairy," Jenna breathed, recognition dawning. The planet's native species were notoriously reclusive, avoiding contact with off-world researchers. "I thought your people didn't interact with archaeologists." "Most do not," Keth agreed. "But I am different from my kin. I study the old ways, the forgotten languages. When I sensed your genuine respect for our ancestors' work." He gestured toward the ruins around them. "I found myself curious about your interpretations." "Sensed?" Jenna asked, though she was already beginning to suspect the answer. Keth's expression grew thoughtful. "My people are empathic, Jenna Cross. We feel the emotions of others through proximity and touch. From you, I sense dedication, wonder, loneliness." He paused, tilting his head slightly. "A deep sadness you carry like a stone in your heart." Jenna flinched as if he'd struck her. The accuracy of his observation was unsettling, touching on truths she'd buried beneath layers of professional focus. "That's rather personal," she said stiffly. "Forgive me," Keth said immediately, and she could hear genuine regret in his voice. "I do not mean to intrude. The emotions are simply there. Like colors in light or notes in music. I cannot unsee or unfeel them." Despite her discomfort, Jenna found herself intrigued. "And what exactly do you sense from me right now?" Keth was quiet for a long moment, his amethyst eyes studying her face. Curiosity warring with caution. Professional excitement about your discoveries. And underneath it all, a loneliness so profound it takes my breath away. His voice softened. "When did you last allow yourself to truly connect with another being?" The question hit harder than it should have. Jenna turned back to the carved stone, using the motion to hide the sudden tears that threatened to spill. "I don't see how that's relevant to archaeological research." "Perhaps it is more relevant than you think," Keth said gently. He moved to kneel beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "These symbols you study, they speak of connection, of the bonds between souls that transcend physical form. The ancient Veil Fairy believed that true understanding could only come through emotional resonance." Jenna looked at the intricate carvings with new eyes. "You can read them?" "Some of them," Keth admitted. "The language is archaic, but this particular symbol." He pointed to the spiral pattern she'd been uncovering. "It represents the joining of two spirits who complement each other's gifts. Like a marriage ceremony?" "More than that," Keth said, his voice taking on the cadence of someone sharing sacred knowledge. "The ancients believed that some souls were created to find each other across the vastness of space and time. When such souls met, their connection would unlock abilities neither possessed alone." Jenna felt a strange flutter in her chest at his words. "That's beautiful. Romantic, but beautiful." "You doubt it?" Keth asked, though there was no judgment in his tone. "I'm a scientist," Jenna replied. "I deal in facts, evidence, measurable phenomena. The idea of predestined soulmates is a lovely myth, but But you have never experienced it yourself, Keth finished quietly. The simple statement shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. Jenna had built her career on logic and objectivity, on the tangible evidence of civilizations long dead. Romance had always seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford, especially after her engagement had ended 3 years ago when her fiancé decided he couldn't compete with her obsession with ancient worlds. No, she admitted finally. I haven't. Keth was quiet for several heartbeats. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. May I show you something? Jenna looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his expression. What do you mean? With your permission, I could share what I sense from these ruins, the emotional imprints left by those who built them. It might help with your translation work. Emotional imprints? Strong feelings leave traces, Keth explained. Love, joy, hope, sorrow, they soak into stone and metal like water into fabric. My people can sometimes perceive these echoes, especially in places of great significance. Jenna felt her scientific curiosity warring with personal caution. The offer was unprecedented, no Veilfairy had ever shared their empathic abilities with an off-worlder. What would that involve? Touch, Keth said simply. Skin contact allows me to share what I perceive, to let you experience the emotions as I do. The intimacy implied in his words made Jenna's pulse quicken. Is it safe? Completely, Keth assured her. Though I should warn you, the connection works both ways. You would sense what I feel as well as what the stones remember. And what do you feel? Jenna asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. Keth's silver-veined skin seemed to pulse brighter as he considered his response. Fascination, he said finally. Your passion for knowledge, your dedication to understanding, it resonates with my own desire to preserve the old ways. And... He hesitated. And... A growing warmth that I have not felt in many years, he admitted, his purple eyes meeting hers. You stir something in me, Jenna Cross. Something I thought long dormant. The confession hung between them in the gathering twilight. Jenna felt her heart racing, torn between the professional voice that warned her to maintain proper boundaries and something deeper that yearned for the connection he offered. If we do this, she said carefully, and you sense things about me that are personal. I would never use such knowledge to cause you harm, Keth said solemnly. Among my people, to abuse an empathic connection is the gravest of sins. What passes between us would remain sacred. Jenna looked down at the carved symbol, the spiral that represented souls finding their perfect complement. Perhaps it was the romantic setting, or the loneliness Keth had so accurately identified, or simply the scholar in her that couldn't pass up such an unprecedented opportunity. Whatever the reason, she found herself nodding. All right, she said. Show me. Keth's face lit up with an expression of such pure joy that Jenna felt her breath catch. Slowly, reverently, he extended his hand toward her. His skin was warm despite its dark appearance, and the silver veins pulsed more brightly at the points where their fingers touched. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Suddenly Jenna could feel the weight of centuries, the accumulated emotions of countless Veilfairy who had walked these paths, carved these stones, lived and loved and mourned in this ancient place. Joy sparkled like starlight, ceremonies of bonding, celebrations of harvest, the laughter of children playing among the pillars. Sorrow flowed like dark water, partings and losses, the grief of those left behind when the great ships departed for distant stars. But underneath it all was something else, something that made Jenna gasp with recognition. Love, pure and transcendent and eternal. The kind of connection the ancient symbols described, souls recognizing their perfect match across impossible odds. Do you feel it? Keth whispered, his voice seeming to come from very far away. Yes, Jenna breathed, tears streaming down her cheeks as the emotional symphony washed over her. It's incredible. But there was more. Through their joined hands, she could sense Keth's own emotions, his wonder at sharing this gift with someone who truly appreciated it, his growing affection for her scholarly passion, and something deeper that made her heart skip. In her feelings, he found an echo of his own yearning for connection, his own loneliness among a people who no longer valued the old ways. "Jenna," he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "What we feel now, this resonance between us, it is rare beyond measure. I have lived for 3 centuries and never experienced its like." She could feel the truth of his words and the connection between them, could sense that his feelings matched her own growing attraction. When she looked up at him, his amethyst eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I barely know you," she whispered, though even as she said it, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Through their empathic link, she knew his heart as clearly as her own. "Knowledge comes in many forms," Keth replied gently. "And some truths transcend the merely intellectual." As if to prove his point, he shared a memory through their connection, himself as a young veil fairy, standing alone in these same ruins, studying the ancient texts and dreaming of someone who would understand their beauty. The loneliness in that memory perfectly matched her own years of solitary research, her own dreams of finding someone who shared her passion. "We're the same," Jenna realized aloud. "Both of us, searching for connection through the study of the past." "Perhaps the ancients were wiser than we knew," Keth suggested, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Perhaps some connections are indeed written in the stars." As the last light faded from Valefor's sky, Jenna found herself believing in possibilities she'd never allowed herself to consider. In Keth's presence, surrounded by the emotional echoes of a civilization that had understood the sacred nature of true connection, the careful barriers she'd built around her heart began to crumble. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Keth's smile was radiant in the darkness. "Now we learn what the ancients already knew, that some bonds transcend species, worlds, and time itself." Their hands remained joined as the stars emerged overhead, their connection deepening with each shared breath, each exchanged glance. Around them, the ancient ruins seemed to hum with approval, as if the stones themselves recognized the rightness of what was unfolding between them. For the first time in years, Jenna Cross was no longer alone. David Torres drifted through the corridors of Haven Station like a ghost haunting his own life. The massive space station orbited the gas giant Celeste, serving as a waypoint for traders, refugees, and travelers from across the galaxy. Its diverse population made it the perfect place for someone who wanted to disappear, to blend into the crowd and avoid the questions that followed him wherever he went. His ship, the Midnight Runner, sat in docking bay 7 with a fried neural interface that should have been a simple repair. Instead, it had become another reminder of how thoroughly his life had fallen apart. The interface was military-grade, designed to mesh with the combat implants that still riddled his nervous system, implants that made civilian mechanics uncomfortable and asking too many questions. "Another dead end," David muttered, reviewing the message on his data pad. The third repair shop this week had declined his business once they'd scanned his ship's systems and detected the military hardware. Apparently, even 5 years after leaving the service, he still carried the stench of war. He was considering whether to try the black market shops in the station's lower levels when a soft voice spoke behind him. "Excuse me, are you David Torres?" David turned to find himself looking at one of the most unusual beings he'd encountered in his travels. She was humanoid but clearly not human, with skin that seemed to be made of living crystal, translucent and opalescent, shifting through subtle hues of blue and green as she moved. Her hair was like spun silver, floating around her shoulders as if suspended in water, and her eyes were pools of liquid mercury that reflected his own face back at him. "Depends who's asking," David replied, instinctively wary. Too many people had tracked him down over the years, creditors, former comrades, family members he couldn't bear to face. "My name is Naya Crystal," she said, her voice carrying an odd harmonic quality that seemed to resonate in his chest. "I work in the memory archives here on Haven Station. I understand you need neural interface repairs." David frowned. "How did you?" "Word travels quickly in the maintenance sector," Naya explained with what might have been a smile. "Especially when someone arrives with military-grade wetware that's giving the civilian techs nightmares. I specialize in memory integration systems. Perhaps I could help." "Memory integration?" David had never heard the term. My species, the Crystallari, we experience memory differently than most, Naya said, gesturing for him to walk with her through the station's bustling corridors. We can absorb and preserve memories through direct neural contact. It makes us excellent archivists and, as it happens, rather good at understanding complex memory processing systems. David fell into step beside her, noting how other station inhabitants gave them a wide berth. Whether it was his own grim demeanor or something about Naya's otherworldly presence, he couldn't tell. And you think you can fix my interface? Perhaps, Naya replied. But I should warn you, working with neural systems often involves accessing stored memories. If there are things in your past you prefer to keep private. There are, David said bluntly. But at this point, I don't have much choice. How much? Naya stopped walking and turned to face him, her mercury eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. No charge, she said finally. Nothing's free, David replied automatically. What's the catch? No catch, Naya said softly. Just, professional curiosity. It's been a long time since I encountered someone whose memories carry such weight. The pain radiates from you like heat from a star. David felt his jaw clench. Look, if this is some kind of therapy session. It's not, Naya assured him quickly. I'm simply offering to repair your ship's interface. What I sense from you is familiar. I understand what it means to carry memories that burn. There was something in her voice, a note of shared sorrow that made David look at her more closely. Behind the alien beauty of her crystalline features, he caught a glimpse of old pain that matched his own. All right, he said finally. Where do we do this? Naya's workshop was unlike anything David had ever seen. Located in the quieter sections of Haven Station, it was part laboratory, part library, and part shrine. Crystalline matrices lined the walls, each one glowing softly with stored data. Strange instruments hummed with unknown energies, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with barely contained information. This is where I preserve the memories of the dying, Naya explained, noticing his stare. Final thoughts, important experiences, last messages to loved ones. The Crystallari believe that memory is the only true immortality. Cheerful, David muttered, but there was no real sarcasm in his voice. The reverence with which Naya spoke of her work was unmistakable. Lie down here, Naya instructed, indicating a reclining chair surrounded by delicate crystalline arrays. I'll need to interface directly with your neural implants to diagnose the problem. David settled into the chair, trying to ignore the way his hands shook slightly. He'd been through neural procedures before, more than he cared to remember, but something about Naya's workshop made him feel exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced since his discharge from the service. This may feel strange, Naya warned, moving to stand beside him. Her crystalline skin began to glow more brightly, and David could feel the temperature in the room dropping several degrees. Try to relax. When Naya's fingertips touched his temples, David's world exploded. Suddenly he was back on Kepler-7, the acrid smoke of burning buildings filling his lungs as plasma fire lit the night sky. His squad was pinned down behind the remnants of a civilian transport, enemy fire cutting through the air inches above their heads. Martinez was screaming for a medic, his leg nearly severed by shrapnel, while Chen tried desperately to establish communication with command. Hold the line. David heard his own voice shouting over the chaos. Reinforcements are coming. But they weren't coming. Deep down, he'd already known they were on their own, abandoned by commanders who'd written off their position as lost. The mission had been a disaster from the start, intelligence failures compounding tactical mistakes until 18 good soldiers were trapped in a kill zone with no way out. David tried to pull away from the memory, but Naya's connection held him fast. Through her touch, he could feel her experiencing every moment alongside him, the fear, the desperation, the crushing weight of responsibility for lives that depended on his decisions. I'm sorry, Naya whispered, and David realized she was crying, silver tears streaming down her crystalline cheeks. I didn't mean to go so deep. Your memories are so vivid, so painful. Get out, David gasped, his body convulsing as the traumatic memory played out in perfect, horrible detail. Get out of my head. But Naya couldn't disconnect, not without risking damage to both their neural systems. Instead, she did something David had never experienced, she shared the burden. Through their link, he felt her own memories of loss and guilt, images of crystalline cities falling to plague, of friends and family dissolving into component atoms as their species' homeworld died around them. I was supposed to preserve their memories, Naya's voice echoed in his mind as her own trauma bled through their connection. I was the keeper of our history, our culture, our essence. And I failed. When the plague struck, I couldn't save them. I couldn't even save their final thoughts. The shared pain was overwhelming, but somehow it was also liberating. For the first time in 5 years, David wasn't alone with his ghosts. Someone else understood the weight of survivor's guilt, the crushing responsibility of being the one who lived when others didn't. Gradually, the intensity of the memories began to fade, leaving them both gasping in the crystalline glow of Naya's workshop. When David finally opened his eyes, he found her collapsed in a chair beside him, her opalescent skin dim with exhaustion. Your interface, she said weakly, it was damaged by recursive trauma loops. Your own memories were corrupting the data pathways. Can you fix it? David asked, though the question seemed less important now than it had an hour ago. Already done, Naya replied, managing a tired smile. The corruption cleared when we shared the load. Sometimes healing requires more than technical solutions. David sat up slowly, testing his neural connections. The constant background pain that had plagued him for months was gone, replaced by a clarity he hadn't felt since before the war. How is that possible? Memory is a funny thing, Naya said, struggling to her feet. When it's trapped inside one mind, it can fester, corrupt, destroy. But when it's shared, acknowledged, accepted by another, it loses some of its power to harm. David looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past the alien features to the person beneath. Like him, she was a survivor carrying unbearable weight. Like him, she'd been drowning in guilt and isolation. But in sharing their pain, they'd somehow made it bearable. Naya, he said softly, what happened to your people, it wasn't your fault. Her mercury eyes filled with tears again. And Kepler-7 wasn't yours. You did everything you could with impossible circumstances. 11 of my people died that night, David said, the words coming easier now that someone else knew the truth. I led them into that trap. You led them, Naya agreed, but you didn't create the trap. And you survived to honor their memory, to carry their stories forward. That's not failure, David. That's the burden of the living. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the crystalline arrays around them pulsing gently with stored memories of the dead. David found himself studying Naya's face, noting the way her skin seemed to reflect not just light but emotion itself. Where do we go from here? He asked finally. Naya's smile was like sunrise breaking through crystal. Wherever we choose. Your ship is repaired, and my work here, well, perhaps it's time I stopped hiding among other people's memories and started making some of my own. David felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope. I was planning to head for the outer rim, maybe find some freight work. It's not glamorous, but it's honest. Honest sounds perfect, Naya replied. And I've always wanted to see the galaxy beyond this station. Perhaps we could travel together. Two broken souls helping each other heal. Partners? David asked, extending his hand. Naya took it without hesitation, her crystalline skin warm against his palm. Partners, she agreed, and through their touch, David could feel the echo of her determination, her growing affection, her hope for a future neither of them had dared imagine. As they prepared to leave Haven Station together, David realized that sometimes the most profound connections were forged not in joy, but in shared sorrow transformed into mutual understanding. In Naya, he'd found not just someone who could fix his broken systems, but someone who could help heal his broken heart. And in the crystalline depths of her memory palace, Naya had discovered that some experiences were too beautiful to store away, they were meant to be lived, moment by precious moment, with someone who understood their value. Together, they walked toward the docking bay and whatever future awaited them among the stars, carrying each other's memories like sacred gifts, no longer alone with their ghosts. Epilogue. Years later, when travelers spoke of the memory keeper who sailed the star lanes with her human partner, they would tell stories of two souls who had found in each other the perfect repository for both sorrow and joy. David Torres had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to share that fear with someone who understood. And Naya Crystal had discovered that the most precious memories weren't those preserved in crystal matrices, but those created through love, partnership, and the daily choice to face tomorrow together. In the end, they had become each other's most treasured memory, and their love story would outlast any archive ever built.